I was born in Seoul, and she was like, because you're not white, like you're Korean. I think my upbringing definitely taught me how if you lose something, you also gain something. And if you gain something, you have to lose something.
Welcome, beautiful people, to the Lost and Local podcast. Hey there, we're Adam.
And Hannah.
Two Korean citizens who grew up abroad and are now figuring out life in Korea.
Join us as we share stories and our honest perspective on what it means to be lost and local.
Sweet. So Hannah, this is pretty exciting because this is our official second episode.
Yay!
Yeah, it's pretty cool to think about getting in a rhythm, finding our voices, and moving this exciting podcast into the future. All right, well, we definitely want to thank you for spending a part of your day with us. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. We're going to get a little bit deeper, but before we do that, we thought we would open up with a couple of light questions. So one of the things that when you go to a foreign country are the different assortments of snacks. So Hannah, what is your kind of go-to snack these days?
So it changed recently. I was really into these like peelable gummies, and now I'm into jeonbyung. Have you heard of it? It's like traditional Korean like biscuits almost. And like sometimes they have like seaweed in it, sometimes they have nuts, and it's kind of flat and like half a cone shaped.
Okay.
Yeah, they had it at church like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They have different flavors embedded inside them.
Yes.
Okay.
I had my parents got this like really nice set as a present, and I think I ate like 17 of them in one sitting, but it was really, really good. But what about you? What's your favorite Korean snack?
Yes, I definitely have a go-to snack, and it's kind of boring. It's probably technically not really Korean, but a Korean company does make it. And it's basically this really lightly salted popcorn. I actually gave you some the other day. What did you think?
It was really good.
Yeah, it's kind of like you think, oh, it's just popcorn, but you can actually find it at your local convenience stores in Korea. I actually order it by the bulk, so I have like 4 boxes coming to me soon. So yeah, it's like one of my favorite parts of the day, eating that popcorn. So the next question we thought we'd ask is, what do you love about living in Korea?
Wow. Now that the weather is warm, I think I really love... Also, this is dependent on the region you live in, right? So I live outside of Seoul, and we have a huge lake, and it's so well done. So well done. Like, it's so gorgeous. There's lights at night, and there's so many flowers. There's like places for kids to play. Like there's workout equipment. Have you seen those? Yeah, at like parks.
I love that about Korea. Love it.
Yeah, and like the older grandpas are just like casually like lifting. Like, yeah, I really like that. I don't think you can always get that in other places, nor is it always that clean. But Korea does a great job keeping it pristine and like user friendly.
I think for me, safety is such a huge thing. In the States, I kind of like naturally, without even realizing it, I had this radar always up. You know, anytime you go to a restaurant, you go to a movie theater, you go anywhere, I'm always as kind of the man who is like traditional man who likes to protect. I'm always like paying attention to these things and always aware of my surroundings.
Yeah.
But in Korea, I don't really worry about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm usually so cautious that when my wife and I go to a restaurant in the States, I will, even if the seat is less comfortable, I'm going to have to ask my wife to make sure I can sit to where I can see the entrance. Just because I want to be always consciously aware if an active shooter comes into the restaurant, I can grab her and go. So I'm that type of radar person.
Wow.
And so in Korea, I don't do that at all.
Yeah. You can leave your phone at a cafe and just go to the bathroom and nobody will take it.
Yeah.
But I have found out that stealing bikes, that's universal. Like even in Korea, you get your bike stolen.
Oh.
That's very interesting.
Let's jump into a little bit about our origins. I'm very interested to hear about your life, Hannah. Even though we've known each other for a bit, it's going to be kind of exciting to hear some more detailed information about you.
Yeah.
So share what you would like to share. And I guess one of the things that when we live here in Korea, people generally will ask us, where are you from? What's your usual go-to answer for that?
My go-to answer is Boston. So I lived in Boston for the past 13 years.
Oh, wow.
So like if you ask me about certain neighborhoods, I can answer. So that's why I confidently say I'm from Boston. But that's only part of the story and that's not the full story.
It's Boston. Okay, so you tell people you're from Boston. You've lived there for 13 years, but let's dig a little bit deeper. So in your life, I don't know how far you want to go back, but where did you grow up?
Yeah. It's a whole journey. And sometimes when I think about where I grew up, it sounds like someone else's story because I stayed in Boston for so long. I'm kind of like, who was that person? But I was born in Seoul. And then before I was a year old, my parents decided to pursue like their graduate studies in the States. So we moved to Pennsylvania and I don't really know the neighborhood. Like my elementary school is gone. Like I don't really know where I grew up, but it was in like the suburbs of Philly.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a very homogenous neighborhood. So I think there were 2 Asians in my entire grade and we had about like 8 or 9 different classes for my year. So I never met the Japanese kid that supposedly was there. And I lived there until I was 8.
Okay.
And for most of my 8 years there, I thought I was a white American. Yeah, this is my it was my awakening moment. But when I was 5 in kindergarten, they asked us to draw a portrait of our family, and I was drawing my family with a white crayon. And my mom was like, "You can't do that." I was like, "Why not?" And she was like, because you're not white, like you're Korean, you're Asian. So you should be using different colored crayons. And I think that was the first moment where I realized, oh, I'm different. And then I started seeing the ways that I was different. Like I didn't know people didn't speak a different language at home. I didn't know they didn't. I never got to watch Saturday morning cartoons because I was always at Korean school. Korean language school.
Saturday morning.
Yeah,
Okay.
not that it taught me anything, but I thought everyone had to go to a language school in the mornings. And then I would go to school and they'd be like, "Did you watch this week's cartoon?" I'd be like, "No, like I was at school." So that's when I had this like awakening that, oh, I'm from this weird country called Korea. I don't even remember what it's like. I don't even know where it is on the globe. And then in 2nd grade, my parents asked me if I wanted to go to Disney World. And of course, as a 2nd grader, you're like, yeah. So we drove all the way down to Florida from Pennsylvania. I had the time of my life. Oh, based on the pictures, I personally do not remember anything about that trip, but in the pictures, I looked really happy. And that was how they tricked me into going to China. So they accepted a job in China. They became missionaries, but also like professors at a university. And they were kind of like, if you say yes to Disney World, you have to say yes to China. And of course I said yes. And so after our trip, I found myself on a plane to China and it was such culture shock. Like, and I'm sure if I went to a bigger city in China, it would have been equally as urban or like equally as nice. But I went to a really rural town called Yanji in northeastern China. It's really close to the North Korean border.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of the missionaries were doing outreach things for refugees, etc. So I lived there until the end of middle school, so 8th grade. And it was a unique town because all the locals were Korean Chinese. And so that's like one of the 56 minorities in China. And they immigrated like generations before. So they speak Mandarin, but they also speak a certain dialect of Korean. And so ironically in China, I became a fluent Korean speaker, which is really interesting. And like all of my peers were Korean or Korean Chinese. And so if you didn't speak Korean, you couldn't function. You had to learn. And then Mandarin was more of a second language. Not many people would fluently speak it to me, so I didn't have that many chances to practice it. So that's kind of where my Korean identity became a little more clear, and I wasn't ashamed to be Korean, whereas back in the States, I think nobody shamed me, but you just don't want to feel different as a kid. So I felt a lot of shame. Thankfully, my childhood made me feel more positively about my cultural identity as a Korean. And it was hard. It was hard to navigate 3 different languages and 3 different cultures and customs. And that was extremely difficult. But in hindsight, I think there's a lot more acceptance and pride that I have about my Korean identity than most people who grew up overseas. So yeah. And then after 8th grade, I was going to an international school, and there wasn't enough teachers to expand to a high school. So we made this sort of contract connection with a Christian school in Daejeon. And that's how I ended up going to boarding school for 9th grade. And then after 4 years of living in Korea, in Daejeon, I went to Boston for college, and then I stayed for my 20s.
Okay, wow. So when you went to Korea for boarding school, did your parents move with you?
No.
Oh.
They stayed in China. They lived in China for 21 years.
Wow.
So well into my 20s.
Yeah, so they were there while you were in Boston.
Yeah, and they spent half of their lives outside of Korea.
Wow.
So they left in 94 and they returned like 3 years ago. So
Wow.
like 30 something years abroad.
Wow. And then you said something about, even though you didn't, something about shame, like you felt shame even though people weren't giving you shame.
Yeah.
This was when you were in China.
No, in Pennsylvania.
Oh, Pennsylvania.
Yeah. In China, especially where I lived, everyone loved the fact that we were Korean. So it's also interesting. So I moved in 2001, and then 2002 was the year of the Korean Soccer World Cup.
Oh, yes, I do remember that.
Like we made it to the semifinals. Like we made history. Everyone was so jealous of us because China usually doesn't do well in soccer, and so they vicariously live through us, and they're like, as long as you beat Japan, I'm sorry if you're Japanese, but there's history. They're always like, as long as Korea beats Japan, like we all won. And so yeah, being Korean in northeastern China was a huge plus. But back to your question of like how I felt shame. So in 1st grade, or in many elementary schools in America, they have like culture week, and they ask everyone to like, oh, is that a Pennsylvania thing? Oh,
okay.
It was like that in Boston too. Like,
that's actually pretty nice.
Yeah. We would try to celebrate diversity.
Wow.
It was hard in my small town in Pennsylvania because it wasn't diverse. Like some people were like a few generations away from like being Irish immigrants, but they had already assimilated, become like fully American. So they weren't really celebrating anything Irish. So I just remember almost everyone's mom, they would come in wearing jeans, and they'd bring like a potato casserole or something like not exotic, quote unquote. Like it's like everyday food. And my mom came in with wearing a hanbok, and it was from her wedding. So now that I think about it, it was huge for my mom to like take out her wedding hanbok, wear it, and like she was a student, so she had no time, she had no money, and yet she made like rolls of kimbap and she brought it in.
Wow.
But I felt so embarrassed because nobody else's mom was dressed in like traditional outfits.
Sure.
Everyone else's mom brought food that people were very familiar with, like cinnamon rolls. Like nothing wrong with cinnamon rolls, but just compared to kimbap, it feels really like common. And then because I was like the only Asian in my entire class, I just felt so visible and like I stood out, and I was really embarrassed. So I remember telling my mom, like, please don't come again. But I know I like always apologize. Now as an adult, I'm like, I'm so sorry.
Sure.
Like you made time, and like you showed your love to me through that. And yet I'm so sorry. I was embarrassed. Yeah.
Did you, I mean, it was a feeling that you had, but were there people directly like staring at you, kind of pointing, whispering? Did you feel the shame, or was it something just internalized?
Both.
Oh,
so in the playground, where a lot of teachers weren't really monitoring closely, or there were kids that weren't in my class, or like the older kids, they would definitely like, you know, slant their eyes and be like, go back to China. And I'd be like, why? Like, what does China have to do with me? But it's just like a, you know, universal thing that most kids will tease Asians for. And then because we were on the East Coast, there wasn't a lot of Korean influence. So eating kimchi, eating pickled radish, like everyone would, you know, like scrunch up their nose and be like, oh, that's so disgusting if I brought it to school. But I've talked to my friends who grew up in California, like LA, and they were like, no, my teachers were Asian. Like we always brought Chinese food or like Korean food to school and nobody made fun of us. But for me, it was. And then I'm sure a lot of people know this from like Kim's Convenience or like other shows that portray the Asian experience. Like you want what's that called? Oh shoot, you know those snacks where it's like cheese and like crackers, Lunchables,
yes.
Like everyone brought in Lunchables or PB&J, but if you think about it, it's not very nutritious.
Yeah.
It's not healthy food. It's just like easy to pack for your kids, very processed. Whereas my mom was making me like really nice meals with like rice and like all these panchans. So I should not be ashamed. Like the others should be embarrassed by what they're bringing. But because I was the only one, I felt so singled out. So kind of both internal, also external.
But that's interesting that even though you were typically made fun of like most minorities living in the States, that when you colored your family, you colored them white. Was it because I guess you didn't have any relatives that you guys were a part, like you associated with, so it was more you guys that were kind of isolated?
In a sense, in my daily life, yes, but on the weekends we were constantly in the Korean immigrant community because I was going to language school. Our church was in Korean, so all day I would eat Korean food, spend time with, obviously the kids talk in English, but all the adults were Korean. But on the day to day, I wasn't able to see people like me, or like on TV even. Like in order to watch Korean TV, my parents and I would have to go to a Korean like grocery store and borrow VCRs. And we would like watch K-dramas like a month after it's all done in Korea. And that was the only way we could watch Korean TV. Whereas in China, because we were so close to Korea, we had satellites. So I would watch like Korean TV live streamed.
Wow.
Yeah, in real time. So starting from 2001, culturally, I was pretty much Korean.
And then when you went to China at 8 years old, was it kind of like a breath of fresh air for you? Did you feel better that you weren't the minority any longer? Like, or did you still feel like a minority because you grew up in American or the States culture?
Yeah, I definitely felt like a minority. And appearance wise, in a sense, it's a different sort of segregation because outwardly you can't really tell, right? I look just like a local there, but within the Korean community, they would be very divisive. And so like the Korean kids at the international school were kind of jealous that I spoke English.
Okay.
So they'd be like, why do you speak English to us? You're Korean, you should speak Korean. And then I went to a Korean school for 2 years. I don't know why there was a Korean government school, but there was a Korean government school there. So I went there for 2 years, and they would tell me to go back to America. The Koreans, yeah. Even though all of us are foreigners, Like none of us are Chinese, local Chinese, and yet they were trying to sort of establish that they were the in culture and I was not in the in culture. And there were also like some social norms where even in fourth grade, girls didn't usually play sports. And so all the boys were playing soccer during lunch or recess. I would join them, and all the girls would be like, "Why are you doing that?" And the guys would test you. They'd be like, "Oh, girls don't belong here," and they would like kick it really hard at me, and I'd be like, "Oh, that's it, like bring it on." And I would have to sort of prove myself on the field. So there was still a lot of othering happening, even in a space where we all look the same. And we technically speak the same language.
Wow. And just looking at your life, you had so many different, like, contrasting ways of being raised from the States and then to China and then leaving your parents still while you were young, going off to boarding school in a whole nother new country.
Yeah.
So you have like major like delineations of periods of your life. Do you feel like, looking back in hindsight, what are your thoughts? Do you feel like it was a pro for you? Was it a con? How do you feel like, overarching viewpoint now? Are you appreciative of it, or do you feel like it wasn't the most ideal?
Oh, it's such a... There's no one simple answer to that. I think my upbringing definitely taught me how if you lose something, you also gain something. And if you gain something, you have to lose something. So growing up, my dream was to be normal.
Okay.
Because I never felt normal. And I was so jealous of the all-American girl, like born and raised in the same house, you know, and they go on to get married and they can always come back somewhere for the holidays. Like,
that's true.
That was my dream. Like, I was like, I wish I had that dream. But even while we were living in Pennsylvania, I remember moving quite frequently from like a different apartment to a different apartment. In China, we moved like 4 or 5 times. While at boarding school, you have to empty out your dorm room at the end of the semester or at the end of the year. So it always felt like I had to leave and come back. Even if it was the same dorm the next year, you would still have to take all your stuff. And a lot of people feel that in college, right? So it doesn't really feel like home because you're constantly needing to take things out and you can't store it in one location. So in that way, I think I really craved stability, which is why I ended up in Boston for 13 years. And I was like, I'm never moving again. But in other ways, I think it was an advantage to grow up not being ashamed of being Korean. So when I talk to a lot of my East Coast Asian American friends, there's still a lot of shame, and even more shame in the fact that they don't speak the language like as fluently. They haven't really visited their home countries, but they have this desire to. And so compared to them, because I spent most of my adult life in East Asia, where I looked the same, I could watch TV and understand what's going on. I see other people like me doing various types of jobs. I had representation. I didn't grow up with that same sense of shame. So in that way, I'm very thankful. And then perspective wise too, I think it was much more easier for me to accept differences instead of being like, that's wrong because it's different for me. It was more like, oh, like, can you explain why you think this way? Or why is it that you see the world in this way? And I'm more accepting of those differences than most monocultural people I have met. But obviously there are people who are outside of this, they're not outliers, not defiers. They're outliers. There's always outliers.
Sure.
And I'm generalizing, but that's the general sense I've had talking with monocultural people.
You've lived in the States when you were young. You lived in the States when you were an adult. You lived in a Korean society for the most part in your formative years. What do you identify as culturally? Because from my perspective, you come across very westernized, and your dialect and the way you speak is just completely you sound like you're from the States. So, but you're living here locally in Korea.
Yeah.
So let's dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. Again, like to be honest, my dad is very frustrated with how I identify culturally because he feels like I'm being very selfish in choosing parts of culture that I like and not embracing everything.
Okay.
But I think that's just the reality of being a third culture kid. You end up mushing all the different cultures you've been exposed to into your own identity. And so I actually don't feel completely American, Korean, or Chinese. I feel like I'm a third culture kid, like an adult third culture kid. And I can pass. I can really blend in. So in the States, everyone thought I was Korean American. And they'd be like, why aren't you voting? And I'd be like, oh, don't worry about it, instead of explaining my whole story. Sure. And I spent 2/3 of my life in America, which most Korean Americans can relate to. Like, they immigrated when they were 9. I'm kind of the same way. So besides that piece of paper, in a lot of ways, we're the same culturally. But in other ways, I think they would not have the courage to leave everything in America and move back to Korea. But I have that because I'm kind of like, I could survive anywhere, to be honest. So in that way, I don't really identify with just one culture.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into just your journey back to Korea, because you stated that you were in Boston for 13 years, kind of finding that home instead of always being a sojourner around the world. But here you are back in Korea. So give us a timeline. Like, what was your journey back to Korea? When did you come back to Korea, etc.?
I need to go back a couple years. So when I first went to the States for college, my freshman year, I was in, again, a very small suburban town in northern Massachusetts, like the greater Boston area. And no offense, but they were pretty sheltered. Like, we had people from New Hampshire, like Vermont. And when I would say, oh, look, it's snowing, they'd be like, oh, have you seen snow for the first time? And I would just stare at them. And I just feel like, really?
Oh, it's like, really? You guys celebrate Christmas in Korea? Yeah. That's a thing?
Yeah, things like that. And so I had a really hard time fitting in, even though I spoke fluently. I also was missing a lot of the cultural background. So while they were listening to Justin Bieber and things like that, I was listening to Big Bang because I went to high school in Korea, and a lot of my friends consumed Korean media. So I was much more familiar with Korean media. So we just had nothing to talk about. We couldn't relate in any way. And so during my senior year, we had to choose, because I was an education major, we had to choose where you do your practicum. And I said, I can't be in this town. Like, I can't relate to any of these kids. I don't feel comfortable. Can you send me to Boston? And so I ended up going to Boston, and I worked in Chinatown for a whole year, like my student teaching. And I loved it. It was really, really rough. It was really hard. But I love being around kids who celebrated Lunar New Year, or like knew what it felt like to have parents who don't speak English and you have to translate for them even though you're like 13. So in that way, I really liked it, being with like more similar people with more similar backgrounds. So I initially wanted to come back to Korea and work at my international school, the international school I graduated from. Oh. But they were not really open to hiring me. Yeah. And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons, and I don't want to go into it, but I think that was like a wake-up call for me in realizing that working in Korea is not the same as being a student in Korea, and being a Korean passport holder does not have the same power as holding a US passport. And so in that way, I kind of closed the door on Korea, and my parents were living in China anyway. So I was like, what do I have back in Korea? It's pretty much like going to a new country. So why don't I just apply to some schools here? Boston is famous for education. I get a really good career. So I just worked at public schools for 7 years. And then during the tail end of COVID, I had to renew my work visa, and they were like, are you interested in pursuing a green card? And I was like, oh yeah, great. Like this is as I thought my life would flow. Like I'll get a permanent residency, then a citizenship, and then I can finally vote, and I finally can have the documents to match my sort of like what I feel in a sense. But then as we were talking about the details, they were saying I was looking at 7 to 10 more years of working in the same position at the same school to finally qualify for a citizenship. And that would be 14 years of my life, 14 to even like 18 years of my life to just get a citizenship.
Wow.
And I was also really burnt out from COVID. And like in hindsight, I think it's from being on my own since I was 14. Like you become very defensive because you can't rely on anyone else. You have to rely on yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that finally caught up to me in my late 20s. And so I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, 7 to 10 more years of this. Like I can't. And I had a couple scares in between. Like when COVID happened, my paperwork didn't get through. And so I was in this weird limbo zone for almost 18 months where I couldn't renew my driver's license. So I had a car and I had to commute to work, but I couldn't drive it. And like there was nothing I could do about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's just like, that's what happens with documentation, right? It doesn't really reflect the reality. The fact that I had never had a ticket, or I was like, I have my own car, I can pay my own insurance, and yet they weren't willing to renew my driver's license because my documentation was still on hold. So I think that made me realize like, I'm never going to be safe in this country. I was looking for safety and stability, but this country they're not as open as they think they are. And like, what more could I do to make myself a more like a better candidate? Like what else can I do? I went to the top universities. I have a master's. I'm a teacher. Like I have everything. And if you're still telling me I'm not good enough to be a citizen, like what is there for me? So I was just like, I'm good. I'm good with this country. I'm okay giving up whatever I thought was stable and all of that. And I'm ready to go back to my passport country. So last year, around July, I just finished the semester. I packed up and I moved back.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah. I mean, in a situation where in the States, especially during that period of time in the last few years, the political turmoil and just the whole thing against immigration, I didn't realize coming from an immigrant perspective where you're not a citizen yet, that's quite an arduous situation.
It really is.
Wow.
It really is. And then I think back to all the first gens, like my friends' parents and their journey coming to the States. They probably had to stay in a job they hated just to provide for their family because their job and their sponsorship would change the course of their entire family's lives. And so like, in a sense, I'm really privileged. I'm privileged that I could let go of that dream, American dream, and I can come back to Korea. And Korea is wealthy enough, stable enough to feel safe in. And in some ways, people are like all trying to move to Korea at this point. So it's a huge privilege, but it also puts into perspective how like high stakes immigrating to the States was for a lot of families and why they're always pursuing the American dream because it came at such a high cost.
Well, I really appreciate that perspective. Wow. In light of now moving back to Korea, we actually did cover your time frame of when you moved from our previous episode, but is there anything easier now after living here for the 9 months that you've been here? Have you noticed? Because Boston is still pretty fresh. I mean, it's been less than a year. Have you noticed anything for that transition?
What's nicer? So many things. First of all, the food. Boston is not known for its food scene.
Oh.
It's not very good. So access to so much Korean food that's affordable is just amazing. If you order a jjajangmyeon in Boston, you're paying almost 20 something dollars. Here it's like less than 10.
And not to mention tip and tax.
Yeah.
Tip is like 20% minimum, right?
Yeah.
In the States these days.
Yeah. So, and it's not even that good. So you're not really paying for what you want. So in that way, I love the food scene in Korea. I also love how accessible healthcare is. So in the States, no one goes to the doctor for a cold. Like you can't even get an appointment for a cold. You're just surviving off of NyQuil and Tylenol.
Yeah.
But in Korea, you cough once and the doctor just fixes it immediately.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Or like you break your leg. You don't have to go to emergency care. You can just like go and you don't have to have an appointment. They'll see you and it's super affordable. It's like a $6 copay, quote unquote.
Crazy.
It's like, it's so good. And it's safe. Like, I think near the end of my teaching career, we started doing shooter drills.
Oh, yes.
Like once a semester. And you do not do that in Korea. Like, you're never worried about a shooter.
Yeah, that's just crazy. Yeah, being a teacher during the whole lockdown and then the school shootings, that's just like a reality that's not acceptable. That's crazy. Okay, so how about, we talked about life is a little bit easier here in Korea. How about, is there anything more difficult or that you found that you're surprised that it's more difficult than you realized? Anything on the other side of the spectrum?
So many things.
Oh.
The two things that are at the top of my mind right now are getting a job and then making friends.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's other things, but that's sort of pressing to me right now in my stage of life. And I'm still trying to figure out my career and like trying to figure out, should I stay in education? Should I move into a corporate setting? Should I go into ed tech? And as I'm networking and talking to people in HR, they're all just like, why are you going out of teaching? Like, I've never seen anyone leave teaching and pivot, like do a career change. Whereas in the States, it's pretty common, like both ways. Someone has a different career and they switch into teaching, or you become a teacher and you switch out of teaching. Like very common, especially now. But in Korea, it's like unheard of. And these are people who work for like big companies like Samsung and L'Oreal and like really big companies. And they're all kind of like, I've never met anyone who would leave a job that they're good at to go to a different field and start from the bottom. Like they're just kind of like, do you not want to stay in education? And so in that way, I think finding a job and like pivoting and changing careers, all of that is so much more difficult than it is in the States. And then with friendships, I guess it also comes with not going to school here. Like if I went to college here, I would have more opportunities to meet people my age or with similar backgrounds. But because I'm here and I'm not working, it definitely is harder. And Koreans have, sorry if you're Korean, but they're a little cold. And Boston and New York are known for being cold. Like we're known for being kind but not nice. So if someone's lost, like you'll help them out, but you're not being like, hey, how are you? And you're not making like small talk and like trying to make people feel welcome. Okay. And Korea is kind of similar. And so when I've joined different like sports teams, and I've been on a volleyball team for almost like 6-7 months. I've joined a soccer team for like 3 weeks. And for the volleyball team, it took me 3.5 months to even find out some people's names and introduce myself. That's just not a culture here. And people just play volleyball and then they leave immediately. There's no like small talk. There's no like asking like, oh, how'd you find out about this place? Or like, where are you from? Where do you live? Like nothing like that. It's just like, nice to meet you. And they're very formal. And so even when you introduce yourself, they put a nim자 behind your name. So 한나님. And that's like, it's like calling someone like Mr. or Ms. someone. So you're like playing on a sports team and you're still calling someone like Miss someone, Miss Hannah, can you pass the ball? And you're just like, when are we ever going to become friends if you keep calling me like that? So there's a bit of a wall. And I finally went past the wall with my volleyball team, which is great. But with my soccer team, I'm not there yet because I've only been there for 3 weeks. So I'm looking at another 3.5 months before I figure out everyone's names.
Okay, so you broke through the wall with your volleyball team. Does that mean that you were able to establish like the years they were born and you guys are okay with not using honorifics? What does that mean?
Honorifics will stay forever.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Unless there's something that brings you really close.
Okay.
And I have not figured out what that is.
So what was the breakthrough? How would you describe it? Was you guys all went out to eat chicken and beer? Like what was the breakthrough? Like did you just feel like there was like something?
It was random. I was minding my own business, like tying my shoes, and then suddenly someone comes up and is like, "Hey, what's your name, by the way?"
Oh,
but it took them 3.5 months to do that. Okay. Or like another person was like, "Oh, you permed your hair. Where'd you get your hair permed?" And I'd be like, "Oh, is this the segue into kind of small talk?"
Okay.
But I do think it takes a while for people to warm up to you, and you have to prove that you're not gonna leave immediately. Like you got to show that you're here to stay. Whereas my friends who are here just like as tourists, they rave about how nice Koreans are. And they're like, they were so friendly. They like showed me the right way to go. They helped us like do this. They were so nice. And I'm just like, how come they're not nice to me? Like, it's a different experience for tourists versus people who are trying to settle and become local.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good way to delineate it. And I think it's just the fact that you are Korean. If you were of a different skin color, and you were trying to join the volleyball team, it might be a different way because they probably can't push back the barrier of seeing you like, oh, she's Korean and she speaks Korean. And so they're going to treat you like you're a local. Yeah. Hence local, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So has anything, now that you've been in Korea for a while and sure, you lived a portion of your time in Korea while you were in high school, but has your view of Korea changed at all in the last 9 months?
It definitely has. And that actually really surprised me because ever since I was in 3rd grade, I've constantly watched Korean dramas and like Korean variety shows. So I thought I was pretty in touch with Korean culture and like just the norms. But moving to Korea, I was surprised at how individualistic it's become. Like even more so than when I was in high school.
As in like westernized individualistic?
Yeah, very westernized, very individualistic. Even the lingo sometimes, because when I would go to interview with Korean companies, I wouldn't know what a certain business term was in Korean, but it's the same. Like portfolio, like and a lot of the language they use is the same as English. And so I think we've become very, I want to say Americanized, not even westernized, like specific to America. We were adopting a lot of the culture, like Chong culture that I used to experience when I was in high school. I don't feel it. Really? And maybe it's because we're living in Seoul versus Daejeon is a little more like...
Or anything outside of Seoul. Yeah. Really.
Yeah. Right. It's a little more laid back in Daejeon. But in Korea, like I don't really feel Chong anymore. Like no one wants to talk to anyone. Like, and I think that's why actually a lot of the older people come talk to me for directions because other people are like constantly staring at their phones. But I'm one of the young people who I'm just sitting there and I'm just like looking around. And I think I seem more approachable than other people.
Well, you also have a very affable looking posture and you have a nice, kind face. Oh. So I think that probably lends to it too.
Maybe. But I was asking the friends I grew up with in China, Most of them went to a Korean college and they stayed. So they've been in Korea for like 14, 15 years, right?
Okay.
But they will tell me that nobody has ever talked to them or asked them about directions. And they're surprised that people are constantly coming to me and like asking for directions or asking questions. So they're like, there might be something about you that seems different and more approachable, but I don't know.
Don't kids these days say aura? Like your
Aura.
You have high aura points. I'm trying to sound
100
cool.
aura points.
That's a really interesting perspective because I have a different take on it later, but that's really interesting that you mentioned that because that's almost, it's kind of, in a way, kind of sad.
Yeah.
We're kind of losing our homogenous original culture.
Yeah.
And we're adopting some of the more individualistic westernized ways.
Yeah. Yeah, but even within that, there's still some certain strong traits in Korea. Like if something goes viral, everyone does it. So like a couple months ago, the tanghuru, do you know tanghuru? It's like candied fruit on a stick.
Oh, yes.
It was popular. And then suddenly every store sells it. And they make songs about it. Like everyone's eating it or like filming things with it. And then once that dies down, there's going to be another trend. Everyone's going to do it. So in that way, Korea hasn't changed that much. But in other ways, I'm like, oh, it's very different. It's not the same Korea I remember in high school.
Wow. Okay. Interesting perspective from someone that lived in Korea 4 years ago. I mean, not 4 years ago, 13 years ago.
I know.
And now is back.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Also, can I just make a disclaimer? This is my experience. If you disagree, I respect that. You might have a different lived experience, but this is just my personal lived experience.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thanks, Hannah, for sharing a little bit of your origin.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts that you maybe didn't get to cover that you were thinking before you came here today?
It's not that deep, but I am so excited for cherry blossom season. I remember it being so beautiful when I was in high school, but I took it for granted. I was like, of course there's flowers. Of course there's cherry blossoms. But in Boston, I didn't really live in an area that had cherry blossoms, and everyone was going to like Washington, D.C. for the blossoms and all of that. So in that way, I'm like so excited to see it in full bloom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's like Yoido, there's Seoul National Forest. My wife and I have gone to both of those. Even in our own neighborhood, there's some decent areas for sakura. And then over by bus terminal, yeah, there is something about the flowers blooming after a cold, long winter, which we've had this year.
We did.
It was we had snow just this past Sunday.
We did.
Like we're now into April. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was awesome to hear about your life.
Thanks for
listening.
listening.
I learned some new things, and hopefully our viewers learn some new things. If you all have any questions, put them down in the comments below if you're on YouTube, or comment and on any other platform that you follow. We would love to interact with you all.
5 stars only on Apple Podcast.
Yes, if you're on a podcast platform and they have the ability for you to rate, that would mean so much to us if you could rate us 5 stars if you enjoy it. This is the best way for you to be able to support our channel and help us to be able to continue to have content for you all. And if you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe, hit that notification bell. That's the best way to support us on YouTube. Comment down below, even if it's just an emoji, that would be amazing. And we will look forward to continuing to knock out more episodes, not just talking about us, but also talking about other guests that come on. So very excited about as the future unfolds. If you're seeing this, we might be wrapping up this episode 2, but in the next episode 3, we'll be talking about me, myself, and I.
Woo!
So stay tuned. In the meantime, y'all, thank you so much. God bless. Peace.
Bye.